Hello, everyone. Welcome to the COP27 Pavilion. Today we have a session on tropical glaciers, more specifically the tropical glaciers of Colombia. My name is Heïdi Sevestre. I'm a French glaciologist from the project The Last Tropical Glaciers. But it is my pleasure today to welcome Marcela Fernandez, who is the founder of Cumbres Blancas Colombia. Marcela will tell us all about the amazing work she's been doing in her country of Colombia. She's moving mountains, and I can't wait for her to tell us more about Cumbres Blancas Colombia. Marcela, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Well, I'm shorter than her. Yes. Well, we had the privilege to have Heidi in Colombia, and we met after seeing One Strange Rock, the documentary, and the two of them. Great. Yeah, so we had the pleasure to meet each other virtually. After seeing her in One Strange Rock documentary, I started Cumbres Blancas out of ignorance, out of not knowing that my country has 6 tropical glaciers. I didn't even know what a tropical glacier was. And when I learned that in the next 30 years we're going to be losing our glaciers, it was a very shocking and dramatic experience for me. So all of a sudden, I had in my mind the model of Cumbres Blancas, which is our NGO. It's a collective that wants to give visibility to glaciers melting, starting in Colombia. So we created a multidisciplinary team, scientists, photographers, documentalists, indigenous communities, activists, influencers, mountains with snow. So as Heidi told us, tropical glaciers are miracles, and in Colombia we don't know we have miracles, and we're losing them. So the goal of studying Cumbres Blancas is to give visibility to them before they disappear. So we started by creating a book to the tropical glaciers, and this is the wonderful book. We do scientific expeditions to monitor through citizen science. So really responsible on how can we make them last longer. And if we have had in our family symptoms, what can we do for them to live better, give them better quality of life, or for them to live longer? So for us, glaciers are the same. And we're clearly not doing this if we don't even know that they exist. So, as our glaciologist Jorge Ceballos tell us, the food of glaciers is snow. And if it's so hot in the tropics that they're melting faster, there is definitely something we can do. So since we started, Colombia 37 square kilometers of snow, and today is 32. So if since I started the project, I've seen how my country has lost 5 kilometers of perpetual snow in the Andes, in the equator, and that's pretty shocking. So this is what we do, and we brought Heidi to study our Colombian glaciers. We shared her country. We spoke at the Congress, told the congressmen and women like we have glaciers and they are melting, and we are one of the 10 countries, as Heidi will explain you in her talk, and they're gonna be gone. So we cannot lose more time. Every decision we take in the Congress, from fracking to fossil fuels to mining, will affect the fact that glaciers can stay with us or they will disappear early. So I think glaciers, just like they stole my heart, they gave me purpose, me and my team. And after that, we started to connect the dots with scientists, mountaineers from different tropical countries like Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, even East Africa. So today we have teams in these countries that have tropical glaciers, and the idea is to replicate what we have learned in Colombia in these other countries, always multidisciplinary, and always out of love for the glaciers. Um, so yeah, Haiti visited us. We were able to donate two time-lapse cameras for the country. Now we actually have three of them. So 3 out of our 6 glaciers are monitored by time-lapse cameras. NLabs was generous enough to give us another camera that it's in Ecuador and another camera that it's in Mexico. This way, we want to capture the last breath of the glaciers and show, for those that are know, that climate change is real and that glaciers are the martyrs of climate change. It's like losing our refrigerators. And if you've lived without your refrigerator for days, I mean, it is not that cool to feed yourself, to survive without them. So this is something that we're worried about and that we're basically working on. Like, how would it be to live in a country without glaciers? And this is what Venezuela teaches us. It's going to be the first country in the world to lose its glaciers. And yeah, I think we like to see glaciers as a human perspective. For our indigenous communities, they are gods. They call them Seranqua. And if you see that in your cosmovision you're losing your god, I mean, that's pretty chaotic. So we've been connecting with all the visions of the indigenous communities to understand what can we do from their perspective, from their rituals, from their ceremonies. And I think this is the difference that tropical glaciers have, different from maybe other mountain ranges around the world. And it's really communities are in the center of the life, like their life is connected to the glaciers. And in Colombia and in these other countries, like it is very connected to the ecosystems below the glaciers. So once the glacier disappears, we should be taking care already in what's going to happen with the other ecosystems in Colombia, like Páramos or Bosque Alto Andino, the Andean forest. So because of that, we created a program to restoration of the Páramos, which is Páramo is the highlands. Only 4 countries in the world, and Colombia has 66% of them. So it's really a patrimony that lives in our country. So now we're working on planting Frailejón espeletic, which is a very important plant that is able to capture all the water that comes from the glaciers or from the region or from rain, and through the roots it creates rivers. Like we literally drink the water of the Páramos, and at the same time through its leaf it captures the fog and transforms them in clouds. So if the food of glaciers is snow, and these plants in theory could create snow, what we want is to massively restore these ecosystems, and maybe through them we can make snow in Colombia. So now we're focusing also in that project. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be able to work science so we can get creative and spread the message of conservation and protection of these fragile ecosystems. So thank you so much. I hope more scientists like Heidi can come to visit Colombia, but other countries that have tropical glaciers. And if they are truly the last, well, we make them last longer, at least in the lessons that they can teach us. So thank you so much. Yeah, so you can follow the work in at Cumbres Blancas Colombia, Cumbres Blancas Mexico, Cumbres Blancas Ecuador. Every country has its own Instagram. Yeah, we hope to see you in Colombia or in one of our expeditions so we can bring awareness of our beautiful glaciers.
Thank you so much, Marcela, for these impactful words. And I think it is so incredible to see the work of Cumbres Blancas Colombia. It has been an absolute eye opener to how we can make sure that the local scientific work has an impact, both on the local populations but also on the national governments. And this is what we need today. We need better collaborations between people who are scientists and people who aren't. This is the way we can make sure that the science could be of service to these different countries and really fragile ecosystems. you a little bit about the background of how me and Marcela met. But basically, oh, I don't know if I can change slides. Yeah, perfect. Basically, a few years ago, I was lucky, as Marcela said, to take in different documentaries. And one day I get this message on Instagram. Oh, Marcela, picture of it. So that was back in 2019. And I'm not used to starting scientific work this way on Instagram, but there you go. I get a message from a certain Marcela from Cumbres Blancas, Colombia. This is the message I get. Dear Heidi, we would love to connect with you and tell you more about our project in Colombia. And I must say, at the time, my work was mostly focusing on the Arctic. And I had no idea that there was ice, that there were glaciers in Colombia. So there you go. I get a message telling me that we would love for you to come and climb the mountains in Colombia because we have tropical glaciares and we have only one glaciologist in the country. And we basically need more of us, more scientists to join the work in Colombia. It took me about a thing to reply to Marcela and said, I'm coming. It doesn't take much to get me very excited about glaciers as a glaciologist. So there you go, 2 months later, pretty much, there I was with my team and the team from Cumbres Blancas Colombia, spending hours and hours in a smoky tent with the indigenous communities of Colombia. And to me, as a scientist who had done a lot of work in the Antarctic, but also in the Arctic in Svalbard, this was actually the first time that I got the chance to interact with indigenous communities, to have a dialogue with them, to ask for their permission to work on their sacred mountains, and understand what it means for them to have disappearing glaciers, what it means for them to have this really sacred source of water. And this was a total eye opener for me to understand where they're coming from, to understand the value of their indigenous knowledge, and how the scientific community could be of support for their communities. And I must say, this was really life-changing, really opened my eyes. And luckily, we got permission to work on the tropical glaciers of Colombia. And this was really thanks to Marcela and Cumbres Blancas, the beginning of a very long story, an impactful story on how we can work together to make sure that the voices of the indigenous communities, the voices of Cumbres Blancas could be heard all the way to the government of Colombia. So today we're going to talk more about tropical glaciers, as you know, throughout the day. So what are these tropical glaciers? Well, first of all, they are in the tropics, as their name is indicating. We basically have three clusters in the world where we find tropical glaciers. The biggest cluster of tropical glaciers is Latin America. So this is where we find more than 90% of them. These are the countries of Colombia. These are the countries of Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico. There are tropical glaciers in parts of Peru and Bolivia as well. There are also tropical glaciers in East Africa. These are the glaciers of Mount Kilimanjaro, we all know them, but also the glaciers of Uganda with the Rwenzori Mountains, which are actually the highest and most permanent source of the Nile River. So to know that here in Egypt, we are receiving a few drops of water from the melting glaciers of the Rwenzori Mountains between Uganda and the DRC is so incredibly powerful. So even here at COP27, we are connected to tropical glaciers. And last but not least, there are still a couple of glaciers left in Puncak Jaya, in the high mountains of Indonesia. And these glaciers are on the verge of disappearing. So how come we still have ice in the tropics? Well, it's very simple. There are very, very tall mountains in the tropics. These glaciers are basically inherited from the last ice age. And they've been surviving despite the very rapid increase in temperature. But luckily today, most of the tropical glaciers are above 5,000 meters in elevation. And this is the only reason why these glaciers are still surviving, hanging in there at the top of these mountains. Many of these mountains are actually volcanoes, and some of them are active volcanoes, which doesn't have. But it's the secret to keep these tropical glaciers, it's elevation. So here are how many of these tropical glaciers are left today. Sadly, these numbers are changing on a yearly basis. So today we are truly losing our tropical glaciers. We find them in all these different countries. Peru is the place where we have most of these tropical glaciers. I mean, Peru has mountains way above 6,000 meters. So this is why they're still surviving in Peru. But in most of the other regions where glaciers are below 6,000 meters, they are really in a dire situation. So there are 3,000 tropical glaciers left in the world. This is out of almost 200,000 mountain glaciers. So there's still a meaningful population of glaciers, but they are disappearing very fast. So today, for the scientific community, for the indigenous communities, for the local populations, we have to understand that when it comes to tropical glaciers, we are truly in a race against time. And what is extremely sad from my point of view is that most of the scientific community has totally given up on studying tropical glaciers because for most of them, they will disappear. There's nothing we can do. Sadly, there's nothing we can do to prevent the disappearance of the glaciers of Colombia, for example. We can slow down the melting, but eventually they will disappear. So I just want to give you a very brief overview of where we're at when it comes to all the tropical glaciers in the world, and you're going to see that the situation is really critical today. So let's begin with Peru. Peru that has more than 2,000 tropical glaciers left, but we can see that almost half of the glacial area has disappeared between the 1970s and the early 2000s. So things are changing very, very fast, creating a whole range of consequences over Peru, and we'll take a look at this later. Venezuela, which is a country where Cumbres Blancas is working quite heavily with a handful of scientists in the country of Venezuela. We know that 95% of the glacial area has disappeared since the end of the Little Ice Age, so since the 1850s. When we look at Mount Kilimanjaro, which are probably the most emblematic glaciers in the world, probably, which are tropical glaciers, there again, the glaciers are disappearing very, very quickly. You can see that, 86% of the glaciers there have disappeared. We know that because we have really good photographies from an expedition that took place in 1912. So all these very old expeditions that started to take pictures really early on of the glaciers are amazing evidence of how quickly the glaciers are changing there. If we stay in Africa, in East Africa, in the Rwenzori Mountains, where I'm hoping to go at some point with Cumbres Blancas would be great. We know that the glaciers of the Rwenzori Mountains, of the Mountains of the Moon, the glaciers that are connected to Egypt, to COP27, are also disappearing very, very quickly. There are very few studies of the Rwenzori. We're going to try to rejuvenate the studies of the glaciers of the Rwenzoris very soon, but they're probably going to disappear. If it's not in the next few years, it's definitely in the next couple of decades. Mount Kenya is in a terrible situation as well. The one glacier on Mount Kenya is also going to disappear very, very soon. It's, again, probably a matter of a few years. It has lost 90% of its volume since the 1930s. And when we move to, for what is to me, I mean, the most extreme, the most amazing tropical glaciers of the world, the glaciers of Puncak Yaya. And I would like to say hi to Donaldi Permana, our friend, who is doing amazing work with his team there. They're really amazing scientists. single year. So we're really talking about a super extreme situation. And yeah, I feel you, Marcela. It's incredibly sad for sure. So this is why we need to do something. This is why we really need to fight for the glaciers of the tropical regions. We absolutely cannot give up on these glaciers. But it's really up to us, the scientists, to work with local projects which are really moving mountains in these countries. So why should we care about these tropical glaciers? Why are they still so relevant, so very important today? Well, it's pretty simple because of the water that they have. And even though they are very small, even though they are disappearing very, very quickly, they still matter. I mean, this is a picture from Bolivia and everything is there. You see the glaciers at the top of the mountain. You see the indigenous people working around these mountains and they benefit from the meltwater, especially during the dry seasons. In the tropics, this is what you have. You have a wet season bringing a lot of snow, hopefully, mostly rain today, and you have dry seasons. And the dry seasons, well, if you don't have water coming from the melting snow and ice, you simply do not have any water left. So for agriculture, for power generation, for drinking water, also for the integrity of these ecosystems, we need these glaciers to survive. And I wanted to show some amazing pictures from Colombia because you have to see it to believe it. I mean, this is what the tropical glaciers of Colombia look like. I mean, we're not used to seeing landscapes like this. But to me, this is incredible. I mean, Marcela described it as a miracle to see have glaciers on these mountains. It is truly a miracle. And we should try to preserve this miracle for as long as we can. These are the tropical glaciers of the Santa Isabel mountain in the Los Nevados National Park in Colombia. To me, I feel that I left a big part of my heart there, and I know it is the same for Marcela. These are glaciers that are still incredibly beautiful today, but it is also saddening to see how small these glaciers have become. And if you look at the glacier on the top of the right-hand side, and Marcela has been there, she has climbed this mountain all the way to the top. Look at how little snow there is left at the top of the mountain. And there's a very easy way to see whether a glacier is healthy or not. Go to this glacier in the middle of the dry season, see if there is any snow left. Snow is the key to survival of these glaciers, and there is still some snow left. So there is still hope. This is very, very important. But there is a very, very little amount of snow. And I know that Cumbres Blancas Colombia has been working on solutions to make sure that that snow doesn't go away. And using low-tech solutions, simple solutions that anybody can afford, we can make sure that the snow that is being carried by the wind, the snow that make sure that the snow stays in place. And this is a way that we can slow down the melting of these glaciers. Marcela explained that these glaciers are so very important for the paramos, for the wetlands that we find mostly in Colombia. I mean, look at this. Look at how incredible this is. This is absolutely stunning. These wetlands, these high altitude paramos are stunning. I've never seen anything as beautiful as this. This is an ecosystem that is extremely biodiverse. This is full of endemic species. This is a drone picture looking down, and you have this mosaic of colors of species that also are really important for the indigenous communities. The indigenous communities would find medicinal plants in these paramos. But these paramos are most importantly these natural sponges that will take the water from the glaciers, mostly water from the rain and also the melting snow, and release it throughout the year. So the paramos, as you explained so clearly, Marcela, they are a key element of these landscapes that are the link between the high altitude environments and the lower altitude environments. And the populations of Colombia and the populations of all the other countries need these paramos to stay healthy. They are also a key carbon sink. So as long as they're receiving water from the melting glaciers, they will stay in place, they will keep absorbing carbon, they will keep on releasing water. Who knows what will happen to these paramos when the water will stop coming during the dry season? And there's a lot of work being done on this at the moment. And speaking of the local population depending on the water from the glaciers, this is all the way down around the Los Nevados National Park. You have all these rivers that stem from the melting glaciers. You have all the coffee plantation that you're working a lot with them with Cumbres Blancas Colombia, and this subsistence agriculture needs the water that is coming from the glaciers. And last but not least, there is a lot of tourism taking place in Colombia to have the chance to witness these last glaciers. And I couldn't believe how many people were there taking selfies, really enjoying these beautiful landscapes. But we have to understand that these glaciers are still a pillar of the economies of these tropical glaciers. I mean, see how many people go to Mount Kilimanjaro every year. Well, the same thing is happening in Colombia. And with IDEAM, the Hydrological Institute of Jorge Luis Ceballos in Cumbres Blancas, they are making sure that these tourists know what is happening, that they are fed the right information, and to make sure that we are empowering these populations to act and to make a difference. So to come back to the tropical glaciers of the world, what exactly is affecting them? It might be super obvious, right? I'm sure everybody here in the room is like, oh, climate change, climate change. Well, it's not that simple, actually, when it comes to tropical glaciers. And this is a picture on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, basically. Right? This is what it looks like up there. So yes, temperatures are increasing in the mountains. I mean, this is absolutely no spoiler. We all know here that mountains all around the world are warming so much faster than the global average. This is part of the reason why is because of albedo, because we are losing these white surfaces of snow and ice that reflect solar radiation back in space. So they're becoming darker and darker every year, absorbing sunlight and getting warmer, melting the ice even more. So yes, this is what we're measuring. There's no doubt temperatures are increasing faster in the mountains. But what we're seeing is also that deforestation is making these mountains a lot drier than they were. So when you look at Mount Kilimanjaro, for example, the main cause of the retreat of the glaciers is deforestation. It is actually not climate change. And that is great, actually, because we know that we have a very simple solution to make sure that these environments stay as humid as possible. And this is also why it is so important to make sure the paramos in Colombia stay healthy, to capture all this humidity, to make sure that this humidity stays around the mountains and that when there is precipitation, the precipitation falls as snow. We also know that there is a lot of air pollution in these countries. And the air pollution can come from human activities. I mean, I remember all around the Los Nevados National Park in Colombia, you have these brick factories, right, that are super, super polluting. So all this aerosol in the air can land on snow and ice, making these surfaces darker, making them absorb sunlight so much more readily. But we also have natural dust in the atmosphere. And when it comes to Colombia, again, we have a lot of volcanoes that really don't help. And when the Nevado del Ruiz starts erupting and releasing all these ashes on the glaciers, we know it's not going to be a good year because they're going to be so much darker. So this is one of the glaciers in Colombia buried under the ashes from the volcano. So what are the consequences of the melting of the glaciers, of the tropical glaciers? Well, it's very important that the consequences are not just for the very local populations, not just for the indigenous communities who are dependent upon the meltwater from these glaciers. First of all, it is creating a whole range of hazards. I mean, this is insane what we're seeing at the moment happening in Latin America. When the glaciers recede, their meltwater has to go somewhere. And what we're seeing in a country like Peru, for example, is hundreds of lakes being formed because of the retreat of the glaciers. So glaciers are really good at carving, at eroding the landscapes around them. You know, they create all these over deepenings, which is what you can see here. And these over deepenings get filled with water, meltwater from the glaciers, and the water is pretty strong. When it reaches a critical volume, eventually the water will want to go somewhere, and it can create these glacial lake outburst floods that we see all the time happening in the Himalayas, sadly, in the Hindu Kush Himalayas. But they're also happening with disastrous consequences all over Peru, in Bolivia. So this is having direct consequences on the local populations, but also over tens of kilometers down the valleys that are connected to these glaciers. Water, of course, the water from these glaciers is disappearing. They have already passed their peak water. So they are only giving us less and less and less water every year. And a country like Peru has had to create insane networks of tunnels to capture the water from these glaciers on the eastern side of the Andes to bring the water to the western side of the Andes, to the Pacific side of Peru, just to make sure that there is water going where the economic activities are taking place. So this is really critical. We're starting to see already conflicts between countries because they are losing these crucial source of water. We know that in the world, 3.5 billion people, not just in the tropical regions, but 3.5 billion people depend upon water coming from mountain glaciers. It's really obvious when you think about the Himalayas. Imagine India, China, depending upon the water from the Himalayas, but it's the same in the tropical countries. And this is a picture of La Paz. And you see barely, but there are all the glaciers stuck in the mountains there. And in La Paz, 30% of the water comes from the glaciers. Think about what will happen when these glaciers will be gone, because it's just a question of time. Hydropower is huge in these countries. And, you still want water to feed the dams during the dry seasons. If you don't have the water coming from the glaciers, that will be a big question mark to how will they adapt? How will they be able to continue to produce hydroelectricity when the glaciers will be gone? And I think it is so very important to mention the social and cultural impacts of the melting glaciers. And I'm so glad this was raised actually by Iceland yesterday, by the Minister of the Environment of Iceland, who said that even in a country like Iceland, who are so connected to these glaciers, they feel deep inside the loss, the grief from their disappearing glaciers. And imagine how strong the connections are in these tropical countries where we still have indigenous communities having pilgrimages going to these glaciers and they cannot do that anymore because their glaciers are receding so very quickly. So never ever forget that there are still populations who understand how important these landscapes are. There are still populations who have cultural or belief systems associated to these glaciers that will suffer the loss of these glaciers in many ways that we cannot imagine. And agriculture, of course, I mean, this is a picture from Africa. And there we're starting to see conflicts related to the loss of ice around Mount Kilimanjaro, for example. People have to move away from their original crops to find water somewhere else. But unfortunately, where there is water already belongs to someone else. So there is a lot of conflicts, a lot of migrations that are already taking place because of the loss of tropical glaciers. This is an image that kills me every time I see it. I mean, look at this. This is in Bolivia. This used to be the highest ski resort in the world. It was there because there was a glacier there. So people could ski year round. But unfortunately, this economic source has disappeared with the glacier. So unfortunately, we're starting to see that this is having impacts on the national economies of these countries that still have tropical glaciers today. And of course, Marcela mentioned the very importance of the flying harness. Look at them. This is what she was talking about. Look how beautiful these species are. And I'm so happy that Cumbres Blancas Colombia is working on a program to replant or reforest these paramos because they're an extremely important, they're a key species of these ecosystems. But they are burnt, they are being attacked by human activity year after year and after year. But without the paramos, we would lose this key species of these ecosystems and lose the pressure water that they store during the year. So I think it's very important to talk about solutions when we talk about what is happening to these tropical glaciers, because we more often than not think that it is too late, that there's nothing we can do. And this is why the scientific community has given up on these glaciers, sadly. So is there anything we can do? Can we still try to save them? Can we try to slow down the rate of melting of these tropical glaciers? Well, it is very clear that climate change has a role to play in the disappearance of tropical glaciers. The temperatures keep on rising. These glaciers have passed their threshold of survival. And we know that it's only a question of time before we see the disappearance of these glaciers. But for all the other glaciers in the world, it is not too late. And for those glaciers, we need to make sure that we go away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. This is nothing new for the people here at COP, but it is critical that we never, never forget the importance of mitigation. It is also crucial that we understand the importance of what's happening here at the Cryosphere Pavilion, that we understand the importance of what Cumbres Blancas does all over the Latin American countries. Education is key. And when Cumbres Blancas Colombia started, I remember Marcela telling me that there are so many people in Colombia who actually do not know that there are glaciers in Colombia. So this is why we need to make sure that the local populations understand the value, understand how precious these ecosystems are, because they are still there. We can still slow down the melting. And this is why we need the scientists to be on board. We need the scientists to be of support for these projects. Outreach and science communication is key, because if we want people to act, if we want to empower them to make a difference, they need to understand why it is important to make a difference. This is why education in collaboration with the indigenous communities is so, so very key today. And perhaps I can show you a little bit more about the work my group from the last tropical glaciers has been doing with the amazing group of Cumbres Blancas Colombia. So this is just a handful of pictures, and I can see this is making Marcela smile. But this is, you know, the collaboration that we do in Colombia. And it makes me so happy to see this, because we have everyone here pretty much. We have Cumbres Blancas Colombia. We have the local glaciologist, Jorge Luis Ceballos, the tall man in green at the back of the picture. We have my group, Last Tropical Glaciers, and we have the people from the National Park of the Los Nevados National Park. And we're celebrating the installation of something that looks so simple for us, the scientific community, the installation of a time-lapse camera. But it is so important for the people of Colombia. This is the time-lapse camera from NLapse, which is this amazing French company that has launched the Planet Watch program, and they're donating time-lapse cameras left and right to projects all around the world to make sure we have eyes on these disappearing glaciers. And you know, this is so very important, because during COVID times, I remember Jorge couldn't go to the glaciers. He couldn't do his measurements for months and months and months. And the only way we could keep monitoring the tropical glaciers was thanks to these time-lapse cameras. So it sounds so simple, but it makes such a big difference in these countries. And Marcela, you will remember this day we spent reforesting or replanting one of the paramos around the Nevado del Ruiz. And this is Tonito Toño from my group, who is our photographer. And it was so incredibly joyful to be there with Cumbres Blancas, with the army of Colombia, with the football team of Colombia, and the scouts. I mean, things like this only happen in Colombia, I feel. But it was a day of joy, a day of climate action. And I want to make sure that when the scientists travel to these countries, that we take part in those events. It's not just about collecting data. They already have local scientists doing an amazing job. But let's make sure we contribute even more to what is happening in these countries. We also try to give talks, and Marcela is a killer at this, at organizing talks every day to make sure that the voice of the tropical glaciers is being heard loud and clear. We went to universities in Bogota, in Manizales. We even had the chance to speak, and you mentioned this, to the Congress of Colombia, which is one of the biggest highlights of my entire life. I mean, this was absolutely crazy to make it happen. But this is how it can work, to make sure that the scientists, when they travel to a foreign country, understand that they can put a spotlight on the amazing work that is taking place in these different countries. So to conclude this talk, this is what the tropical glaciers look like. They are all disappearing, one after the other. This is the Conejeras Glacier. This is a glacier that I'm sure the next time we go back to the mountains of Colombia, the glacier might be gone. I've never seen a glacier changing so rapidly over a 2-year period. This absolutely kills me when I see this. It makes my heart break, but it makes me full of energy as well to make sure that we do not continue along this trend. We know today that we will probably lose the glaciers of Colombia. Sadly, we can slow down their melting, but eventually they will be gone. But it is absolutely not too late to save the glaciers of where I'm from, the European Alps, to save the glaciers of Alaska, the glaciers of the Himalayas. But right now, we are on a trend to lose all of these glaciers. Let's be very clear here. If we continue on the current rate of growth of CO2, by the end of the century, we would lose almost all the glaciers of the European Alps, pretty much all the glaciers of the Western Canada, US, all the glaciers of New Zealand, all the glaciers of Scandinavia. Okay, this is where we're at. So we need to be very clear that the only way we can still save some of this ice is by keeping global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. This is it. This is the bottom line. So I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart, Marcela and Cumbres Blancas Colombia for all the work they're doing. We need Cumbres Blancas to be everywhere in all these different mountain ranges. And we really, really need the scientific community to work with these local projects. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions online or in the room, please ask. I don't know, Marcela, if you can stay a little bit longer. Okay. Questions? Come, Marcela. Any questions for Marcela? Do you have a question, Sebastian? Oh, yeah. Come here.
Hello. My question is, the current paradigm of glacier presence in the mountain is one thing, but we're now switching to a hypothetical desert in the mountain tops. So what would be the correct way to plan to establish a management design for this new environment that will not have ice, but nevertheless will have a water equivalent, which can be infiltration, storage, and can constitute a new type of ecosystem in 50 or 100 years. So what's your opinion about this?
Yeah, Sebastian, thank you. Yeah, this is a very key question. So what we're seeing now is that we have based entire economies, agricultural systems on a certain seasonality. So for example, in these countries, we know there is a dry season and a wet season. During the wet season, we expect a lot of rain. During the dry season, we hope to still get some water from the melting glaciers, but this is diminishing very, very quickly. So the seasonality is clearly changing at the moment. And so we shouldn't expect to have any more water during the dry seasons, for example. This is very important. So there will be a change of temporality, of seasonality, but also in a change in space. There will be areas where we will not be able to have crops there anymore. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt about this. We're starting to see this already, people having to migrate because of the lack of water during the dry seasons. The point you raised is very important. It's all about water efficiency. And we're starting to see, for example, all around Kilimanjaro, there's a lot of work being done on this. Just to make sure that, okay, the little water we have during the wet season, that we find a way to store it, that we make sure that the water networks are incredibly efficient, that we do not waste any of this water. It's also in the crops that we use, in the subsistence agriculture that is taking place in these regions. Make sure we use crops that are used to these conditions. I mean, see in your beautiful country what is taking place in San Pedro de Atacama. There are only species growing that can survive to on very little water. I remember meeting some Atacameños there that only get water for a couple of hours every few weeks during the dry season. So you really need to grow crops that can survive on this very little amount of water. But in the end, we should really focus on this nature-based solutions, on the ecosystems. And this is why making sure the paramos survive, making sure the paramos are not burnt. Maybe I would love for you to talk about what's happening in Colombia with the paramos, because there is still a really massive human pressure on the ecosystems that store the water in these high altitude environments. And if we lose the glaciers and lose the paramos, we lose everything. So maybe Marcela, you can tell us more about the importance of the paramos. Yeah.
Yeah, so regarding the paramos or the wetlands, I mean, cows shouldn't be living 3,000 meters above sea level. I don't even know how they survive. Like potato is not the right crop for the paramo. There are certain ways of living. Like they need to earn money, they need to make money, but in the wrong way. They're currently doing it in the wrong way, and that's years of legislation, because they call it zona amortiguadora, like the zone that should be protecting these ecosystems, and we lose that line of protection. So right now what we're doing is literally like, can you give an economical resource for those people that are used to have a cow that will give them money, or a crop that will give them money, and what is going to be the right substitute? That in terms of wetlands. And in cases, for example, like India, like we've seen what they do with the ice stupas, and we start asking ourselves, what if we make an ice stupa in the tropics? So we're learning and sharing best practices that we have seen in other countries, and see if we could adapt those experiments and understand if it's going to work. Because if you don't know that there are glaciers in, for example, my country Colombia, which is the majority of the population, we don't even know what's going to happen when we don't have them. What are the massive consequences? So at least a country like Colombia, it's not that much worried about those consequences, because it's not directly like Ecuador or like Peru or like Bolivia from the glaciers. But once they're gone, of course, the other ecosystems are going to be much more affected. So that's where we're also focusing the energy.
Yeah, and I think very quickly that we need to understand that the water from the glaciers is not a renewable source. That's for sure. Sadly, this is where we're at right now, and you guys are pioneers in this way, that you have to find solutions to a world without ice. And I think there's so much to learn from these countries who are desperately trying to adapt as quickly as possible now, because this is reality for you. I think in the Alps, we still think that we'll have glaciers for a very long time. I met some people from my country yesterday, and they had no idea that we could lose all our glaciers by the end of the century. But this is reality, and we really need to support the work being done in these countries to make sure that we learn from the solutions you implement, because we will definitely need those in the next few decades as well.
And I think the ignorance is not only in the tropical countries. Like when I was in pandemia, I traveled across the US and I visited the ten states that have glaciers. And I was shocked. Like people in Nevada don't know that they have a glacier. People in California don't know that they have a glacier. What shocked me the most, glaciers don't even have a name. Like there are so many unnamed glaciers, and I'm like, okay, in Colombia we at least have names for them. We could be ignorant, but if you don't name what you have, how are you going to protect it? So yeah, I think this is definitely the awareness that we need, and it is through this collective power that we can. I mean, I always compare with oceans, and it's not a competition, but oceans are very organized. Like they have like summits, pavilions. They're super organized. All the associations are together, and glaciers, like here we are. Like like we need this connection to work together, and that's how Heidi and I got connected. And if you look around, there are not many others to join forces with. I think we know them all, and it's still very limited. Budget is very limited, and it's very remote. So those who are really taking care of glaciers are very busy in the fields. It's tiring, it's challenging. There's not much internet, so communication between us, it's even hard, because if you go 3 months for an expedition, we are not in communication for 3 months, right? So I think it is also taking into consideration the extra layer of challenges that working with glaciers has.
Hi, I have a question for Marcela. So I couldn't help but notice, but you got understandably emotional. It's loud enough, yeah. Understandably emotional when thinking about the loss of a piece of your home, and it's not loud. Okay. Um, yeah. So I feel like I'm curious how you can transcend that feeling of a home, because as you, oh, there we go, thank you, as you just said, people can be ignorant, and if the connection's not there, they don't want to save it. And it seems like in Colombia, you feel very connected to your home. So how do you transcend that empathy to a natural environment, to policymakers, to make policies to get more funding to fund these projects, etc., so that people actually do get emotional about it? Because I think sometimes people can look at numbers, but if they don't feel like it's part of their home, they don't feel a need to save it. So how do you kind of harbor empathy in people?
Yeah, I think it's, you cannot love what you don't know, right? And for me, I mean, I really got very emotional because I sometimes forget how much we have done. And when you realize how urgent it is, and I know this presentation, I mean, I translated it 10 times in Colombia, but it is as if it was again the first time, because I mean, we met a couple of years ago, and there's so much we could have done, and we're doing it, but it's just so much that I think for me it's like, I think we're chosen, every person is chosen to have a cause, a purpose. In activism, in climate change, for me it was glaciers. For others, has been the mangroves, the polar bears. So, as we need to, everybody should find as fast as possible what is it, and just pull all your heart into it and connect really with that. So I think taking people, as Heidi was saying, to these places for us to see how shocking it is, and for us to like not be skeptical about it, be real. And glaciers are the easiest thing, even through pictures. That's why we decided to make the book, because if you see, like what Heidi is showing us, like it is undeniable. You cannot deny when you see a glacier over the years that something has happened. And I mean, it's clearly because of us, no? And just to say, I've been talking a lot with indigenous communities, and in the Inca vision, there we speed up 7,000 years what should have happened 7,000 years. There they have a period of 25,000 years, and I was talking with the elders, and they said it's 7,000 faster than it should have been. So I told him, like, so what do we do with the glaciers, like what should happen? And he told me something that is still very shocking for me, and he said they need to go now, like they need to disappear, because we need to unfrozen emotions that we don't even know we need to make the change happen. So for me it's like I'm still digesting this, because it's really hard. And yes, maybe tropical glaciers are the chosen ones for us to wake up. And in their era and in their vision, snow will be back, glaciers will be back, but we won't be here to witness that. So while we are here, what can we do?
Hi, my name is Dennis Knight. I'm with ASHRAE, so I'm a mechanical engineer that for 48 years has worked on the indoor environment, right? And in many cases, I work on air conditioning, indoor air quality. So buildings are a part of the problem, right? And for 43 years, I've been focused on sustainability. So 17 years ago, I was walking with my 18-year-old son. We were hiking up Mount Rainier, all right? And my son's an artist, my daughter's an artist. They didn't want to be an engineer because I worked too hard, right? So we're walking up Mount Rainier, and this is what really brought it home of how important your work is and how important glaciers are to the health and safety and welfare of all of us. Is I'm sitting at the top of Mount Rainier at the base of the glacier. I didn't think my kids cared anything about what I'd done or even been listening to me, right? We're sitting there. You can hear the water running off under the glacier. And my son looked at me and he said, "Dad, do you hear that?" And I get goosebumps just telling it now. And I said, "No, son, what do you mean?" He said, "Do you hear that sound?" And I said, "No." And he looked up at me and he said, "It's the sound of global warming." And I might even tear up saying that, but thank you so much for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. And it just how important this is. So thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Cryosphere Pavilion, and really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, this is pretty touching. I agree. Yeah. Any more questions here at the pavilion or online? I don't know if you have any comments on StreamYard. Let's see. But I will say one thing, is that this lady here doesn't take no for an answer. So when it comes to talking to the government, finding a minister, talking to the prime minister, I mean, you absolutely do it. And I remember seeing her walking around the Colombian Congress with, she had made these bracelets with the indigenous names of the glaciers. And she was attaching these names to the wrists of as many people as she could. This sounds super simple, but what a difference it makes for them to be carrying these names. Because then it is their responsibility, right? Then it becomes really personal. And I think this is what we need. I think here we all know that these glaciers are melting. It sounds so obvious. Yes, they're melting, but we don't have to accept this today. We do not have to accept what is happening. But it will take each and every one of us to understand the power of our voices. And you understand the power of your voice. We need to understand the power of our votes. We need to understand the power of the people we work with. Because it's only by having collective action that we will be able to make a change. And the changes that have been initiated in Colombia are tremendous. And we need to learn from this. So give us all the pro tips you have learned, Marcela, because I can see that this is the way to go. This is how we're going to win this fight. Any more questions? All right. Thank you so very much, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, ICCI and the Cryosphere Pavilion and Cumbres Blancas Colombia for being here. Thank you.